Hey, hello again. Last lesson we spoke about for loops and how we can utilize them to basically count letters. Doesn't sound super useful, but I can promise you in the future for loops are incredibly useful. But there's another type of loop, and it's the while loop. Now this while loop has two different types, just like the for loop does, well, for what we're going to cover anyways. And the first one is just a basic while loop. And the second one is a do while loop, and that's a little bit different. A do while loop is not super common, so we're not going to go over it very often, but it does definitely have its uses. So if you remember, in a for loop, whenever we create a variable, so it's like for var I, actually, let me type this out. For var I is equal to 0, I is less than 10, for example, I++, and then we have our code in here. Awesome, basic for loop. A while loop gives us a little bit more control and a little less automation. So a while loop is, we could say while I is less than 10, do a bunch of code. Now, you have to be careful with this because a while loop does not iterate this index value for you, or this letter I. It does not increment that for you. Let me be clear. It does not increment that for you. The reason I'm specifying this so much is because this will run forever. And if you do not break from your loop, if you do not increment whatever your counter is supposed to be, or decrement however you write your loop will run forever, and it will eventually crash your computer. Unless you can close your browser or your tab in time or stop the script. But generally, yeah, this will run forever and it will crash your computer. And it will crash other users' computers too. Which, if you want to be a little bit malicious, if you want to be a little bit of an a-hole, by all means, yeah, go ahead and do that. But I can promise you that you're not going to win any awards for being that kind of developer. So, without further ado, let's delete that stuff. Let's make this just a wee bit bigger. So the first thing we have to do, we have to specify a variable. So var I is equal to, you know what, let's start this at 3, because it doesn't have to start at 0. Now, in here, do some code. But before I write any code, as my personal best practice and what I've seen a lot of other developers do over the years is they automatically add their incrementer. Essentially, this is the long way of saying for var I is equal to 3, I is less than or equal to 10, I++. So this and this, those are the same, believe it or not. Now, why would we ever want to use this? Well, because sometimes we don't know what this is going to be. Sometimes we want a little bit more control. Sometimes we just want to do a loop. We want to create a loop that just goes on for a very long time. Sometimes we want to reset I in the middle of its own loop. Sometimes we don't want to increment by 1. Sometimes we want to increment by 1. Maybe sometimes we want to increment by 2. Sometimes, you know, if someone has a particular score or answers a question the right or wrong way, we set them back 5 points and the loop continues until they eventually reach the goal of 10. So let's go ahead, console log I. Theoretically, this would start at number 3 and go 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 all the way to 10. And once it gets larger than 10, which is right here, it's going to go back and say, oh, I is larger than 10. Don't execute this code anymore, and continue with whatever else is below your loop. So I'm going to save that, go to my page, give it a refresh. There we go. We have 3 to 10, just as expected. Now, just like our for loop example, we could have variable sentence, something in here. I'm not going to be creative with that sentence, and we could say for var I is less than sentence dot length. And this will run from 3 to however long the sentence is. Is that what we want? I don't know, maybe not. Really depends on your application now, doesn't it? In this particular example, we're not going to do that because I think we have made this pretty clear about how those work. Now, I'm just going to comment that out, and we're going to do a do while loop. And here is the difference. Do some code in here, while something in there. So here's the difference. The do while loop will always execute the code once and then check to see if it's valid. So if you anytime you want a loop to run at least once, use a do while. Now, we don't see that often because I don't think enough developers understand what a do while actually is. Whereas just a regular while loop is going to check that condition first, and if that condition is not met, it's not going to run. So the difference is a do while will run 1+ times, whereas a while can run 0+ times. And what I mean by 0+ is it might not run at all. If we change this to 13, this loop should not be executing at all because I is greater than 10, so why execute it at all? Whereas in a do while loop, it will execute. So let's go ahead and give this a shot. We have var a is equal to, let's be like math teacher guy here. Var x is equal to 10. So for every time this runs, what are we going to do? Well, we need to increment it so that our loop doesn't run forever. That would be terrible. And we can console log x, just like that. And then in our while loop, we can say while x is less than or equal to 20. And delete those. I'm going to save, go back, refresh my page, and there we go. We have 10 all the way down to 20. Cool. That's pretty much a regular while loop. But what if we said x has to be less than or equal to 8? Well, x is currently 10, so what this is asking for is 10 has to be less than or equal to 8, which is always false, so it should technically never run. However, because the code is running once, and then it's checking the conditional statement, it's always going to run at least once. And I'll prove it. Console.log, I am running. Save, refresh, gives us 10, I am running, and stops. So why would we ever use this? Well, because there are times where you're going to create an if statement, and it's like, if A is equal to B, do some code stuff that's the same as a while loop below, and then they have a regular while loop and does the same code as above if condition is met. If C is equal to D. C is equal to D. Something like that. So essentially the code up here is pretty much, if not the exact same as the code that's in the while statement. The only difference is the while statement has another condition. Or the while statement does not have a condition that's being met. What did I do here? Making a mess here, Caleb. Come on. There we go. So the while statement is not, the condition in the while statement is not being met. So, for example, we have a variable, we don't write var in here, I is greater than 3. Well, that doesn't match this I up here. Or alternatively, we could do the same thing with x. We could say if x is greater than 10. Well, sometimes we just want that to run once. So what people will do is they will change the value of x. And if they only ever want it to run once, they'll say x is equal to 11, and we're going to do an inverse while loop here and say x minus minus. So while x is greater than 10, basically saying this, 11 is greater than 10, run your code, decrease by 1, and check to see if it can run again. So what's the point of doing all that when every time you want it to run at least once? Now, this is not, unfortunately, uncommon. It's becoming a little less common, but I mean, I still see that from time to time, and that's just not useful. This is the reason that do while was created. It always executes your code at least once. So there you have it. You have the difference between a while loop and a do while loop. I'm going to go ahead and add some comments to this so that you can check out the code and read through it. But in the meantime, if you could go ahead and create a while loop and a do while loop, that'd be great. And please, please don't forget that you have to add your incrementer or your decrements, whatever it is, so that your loop does not run forever.